Welcome to Hampton Lake Homestead. Have you ever used cover crops in your garden? I had read about them and had for the most part concluded that they were more trouble than they were worth. And other than the occasional post-harvest planting of cowpeas, didn't really use them. I understood that they were used to replenish nutrients in the soil and to protect the soil during the off-season. I have in recent years used primarily a no-till method where nutrients are returned to the soil by adding compost back to the soil, and have always kept the soil covered with either black plastic sheets during the off-season or mulch, such as wood chips and leaves year-round. I couldn't see the benefit in planting another crop that I was just going to destroy without harvesting. However, this past fall I came across a series of YouTube videos that led me to a book that has made me see cover crops in a whole new light. Today, I'm going to share that book with you, and I'm going to be planting 3 beds with the warm season cover crop, and I want to show you how I will do it. I also have to clear out the 3 beds and still have some crops left over from the fall that I'm going to be harvesting, and will later do videos of the processing of those crops. So stay tuned, and I will first discuss cover crops in a little more detail. Second, go over my seed selections and talk about the use of inoculants for the legumes that I'll be planting. Third, prepare the beds for planting, which will include harvesting some of my residual fall crops. And finally, planting the 3 beds with a variety of seeds for the cover crop. In Gabe Brown's book, Dirt to Soil, he discusses the 5 principles of soil health, 4 of which are accomplished with cover crops. I will go over these principles now. The first is limited disturbance. By using cover crops rather than tilling the soil structure is not destroyed, and the living organisms in the soil are able to function optimally by continuing to keep soil fertility optimized. The second principle is armor. The cover crops themselves provide armor to the soil. As I mentioned previously, I've been doing this with various types of mulch and will continue to do so. But cover crops also provide armor, but in a different way. The armor protects the soil from wind and water erosion and gives habitat to the living organisms that reside in the soil. The third principle is of diversity. If you look at nature, nature doesn't produce monocultures. Where in nature do you find one type of grass growing, as we often have in our lawns? Prairies have hundreds of different plant species growing on them all at once. By combining different root lengths of plants, as well as some that contain more carbon, others that have nitrogen-fixing capacities, the soil needs are met more effectively. The fourth principle is having living roots. Attempts are made to keep living roots in the soil as long as possible throughout the year. Mulch, like I've been using, obviously doesn't accomplish this principle at all. Living roots feed the soil microorganisms by providing carbon, which is their basic food source. There are warm weather and cold weather cold crops that can be planted, and by utilizing both, along with your main crops that you're growing for yourself, a living root is in the soil for much of the year. Also, if your garden has a layer of clay or rock beneath the surface, which is referred to as a hard pan, then growing plants with long, vigorous tap roots, like daikon radish and mammoth sunflowers, can help penetrate that hard pan. These long tap roots also pull nutrients from deep in the soil and mine them by incorporating the minerals into their structure. Once the plant is harvested, it can be returned to the top of the soil or put in a compost pile, where the minerals then become available in the topsoil for the benefit of future crops. The fifth principle doesn't exactly integrate cover crops per se, but rather integrates grazing animals. Animals graze the crop, trample it, and assist in terminating it, and in the process also provide their manure to the ground. At this point, I do not have animals for grazing and don't feel that they are practical right now for my small backyard garden. But I improvise. I knock down the plants myself by weed eating or mowing, and then continue to do what I've always been doing, which is adding a layer of compost to the soil. So in essence, my actions mimic those of a grazing animal. I am just skimming the surface of all that there is to know about cover crops. If you want further information, then I highly recommend Gabe Brown's book for further reading. You can also search YouTube for talks that Gabe Brown has given, and Ray Archuleta also gives many talks on the subject. One of Gabe's recommendations in his book is to use 8 to 10 different seeds when planting a cover crop. So I'm going to go over some of mine that I'm going to be planting today. First of all, I have 3 different sunflowers, all from 3 different companies. I also have a red Russian kale, which came from True Leaf Market. I have a yellow sweet blossom clover that came from Seed Ranch. A daikon radish, which also came from Seed Ranch. And sorghum Sudan grass, which makes a very tall, mostly carbon cover. I also have some buckwheat, some mung beans, as well as some safflower seed. The only way that I could find this in a quantity that suited me was to actually buy it as a bird seed, which was available at Amazon. I think that it will work fine, but I do not know for sure. And even more interestingly, I was looking for millet, and the only way that I could find it was as a snack. So I have no idea if this is going to grow or not. It's totally an experiment. Now also, I want to point out that I was able to buy inoculants. When using the various legumes for planting, you get more nitrogen fixation if you first apply these inoculants. And so I'm going to be doing that here shortly, where the inoculant is mixed with the seed prior to planting. It's important to do a little bit of research before doing this because certain inoculants are better for certain seeds. I researched this myself from True Leaf Market, and I found their website to be very good at helping you find out which ones are appropriate for what you are planting. So this one that's listed here, for example, is good for pea, vetch, bean, and lentils. There are others that are better for things like alfalfa and clover, and even peanuts, I believe, have a different one. So again, I'm still learning all of this and experimenting as I go, but I'm very excited to see how all this works. By scrolling down just a little bit further on True Leaf Market's website, it tells you exactly how to do the inoculation. I'm going to sit down now and find something to put these seeds and the inoculant in and try to get it ready before going out to the garden. All right, so doing our first inoculant, I'm going to start with the mung beans. Now the directions here say to first pour the desired amount into a container. And I'm going to be starting with a ½ pound, which is also the same thing as a cup. So I have a measuring cup here. Just going to fill that up. Now the directions say next to add the water, and it calls for 1/4 tablespoon of water. Now 1/4 tablespoon is 3.75 milliliters, and 1 teaspoon is 5 milliliters. So this is not going to be exact. I'm just going to get about 2/3 to 3/4 of a teaspoon and pour that in. I could tell right away I'm probably going to need a little bit more than that. Then the next part calls for the inoculant, which it actually calls for 0.05 ounces, which I had to do a little conversion there. That actually corresponds with 0.3 teaspoons. So what I've got is a ½ teaspoon, and again, it's not going to be exact, but I'm going to use a little less than what this is able to hold, and that should be close enough. All right, and then now I'm just going to mix all that together, and it says on the directions here to plant this within 12 hours. Now I'm doing the same thing with the yellow sweet blossom clover, and then add the inoculant. I'm using a different inoculant this time because I'm doing the clover, so I'm using the alfalfa and clover seed inoculant for this one. This past fall I was getting all of my seeds organized and putting them together, and I kept noticing that I had peas, and I see there's also beans that I'd forgotten about. I just had a hodgepodge left over that instead of throwing away, I just put them into this bag specifically with the intention to use them for a cover crop. So this is literally a mix of, I'm seeing at least 6 or 7 different varieties here, probably more than that. Yeah, that comes to almost exactly a half a pound. So it's a lot better than throwing these away. So I'm going to go ahead and mix in the water and the inoculant. Again, this is the one for legumes. Always make sure the right inoculant's being used. And once again, we'll just stir this in. So this is the last step before heading out to the garden and starting planting. Today I'm going to be planting cover crops on these 3 beds. This first bed I've already prepared and it's ready for planting. During the fall this year, I was using it for brassica crops, mostly broccoli, cauliflower, and cabbage. I have since cut what was growing here off at the base and raked the leaves away so that it's ready to go. This second bed I haven't started yet. I still have some spinach left from the fall, which can still be harvested, and which I will probably do today so that I can still eat it. Most of what was in here has died off. I still have some multiplying onions that I'm actually going to leave in place and do my cover crop around it. And then there are some Brussels sprouts that still remain that I'm going to remove today, as well as some collard greens. For these plants that I planted, I'm just going to be taking these pruning shears and just cutting them at the base and leaving the roots where they are. All right, so this made for a pretty good spinach harvest for one day. We'll be having some spinach salads here for the next week. All right, so now I'm going to do the same thing with these Brussels sprouts. These leaves are also very good to eat. A lot of people don't eat them that way, but they're basically just like any other green that can be done as a stir fry or cooked on the stovetop any way that you like. All right, now that I've gotten everything out of the way, this bed and this half bed are pretty much ready to go, other than just raking the leaves out of the way. And I'm also going to have to pull back this micro tubing for irrigation, which I've already done in this bed. I'm going to do that in these 2 as well to temporarily get it out of the way. Okay, I'm about ready to start planting. I'm about to start putting the seeds into my planter. I'm just going to be using one of these walk behind planters. This one's from Scott's. It's got this edge guard that I've actually got turned on. It keeps seeds from going off to the right and restricts their spreading to the front and to the left, which will hopefully make it a little bit easier to do these narrow beds that I'm about to do. So I'm about to get this hopper filled up and get started. All right, so real happy with the way that that got distributed. Hopefully you can see the good mix of seeds all along this one bed. So what I'm about to do now is go and get some compost, put it on top of here, and then do the smaller seeds after. Okay, now that I've broadcast the seed, what I'm going to be doing is using this mushroom compost that I bought locally. I believe I paid about $35 per yard for it. This is 2 yards, which will be way more than I need for this one project. I'm going to be using it for other projects as well. Okay, and this is just a very simple step. Nothing fancy about it. Just taking a shovelful of compost and just spreading it over the area. Just trying to increase the soil to seed contact to help with germination. All right, so I've gotten the compost spread on all the beds. I'm now just about to water everything in good. Once I've got this watered in, I'm going to go ahead and put those small seeds out next. All right, I only have 2 things left to plant. I have the red Russian kale as well as the yellow sweet blossom clover. And this is what it looks like all mixed together. So I'm raking this in. I've already tried a couple of patches over here in this bed. I think it's going to work out fine. So I think instead of putting down more compost, I'm just going to leave it at this and go ahead and get this raked in, maybe water it one more time, and we'll call it done for the day. Okay, and I just wanted to show how I used my rake for this. What you don't want to do is just pull, because what you end up doing is pulling all of the seeds from one side of the bed to the other. Instead, what you want to just do is just go with some up and down motions like this. All you're trying to do is just kind of turn that over so that those seeds just stay where they are and just fall down into the bed. So just that little up and down motion like that increases that seed to soil contact, giving those seeds a better chance to germinate. Okay, well, this is a pretty big transformation since this morning. All the beds are finished. I've got the irrigation tubing, the micro tubing stretched back out again. Everything's been watered in. So these 3 beds are looking good. I'm all in all very happy with them. Only thing that's a little bit of a struggle for me is I want to cover them up with leaves or wood chips. I've gotten so accustomed to the back to Eden method where things are not left uncovered like I've been doing this time. But the difference now is that this cover crop will be just that. It will be the cover. So I'm going to make sure I keep this watered over until the crops have come up. And then after that, the whole thing will serve as the cover for the ground, all of these seeds that I've planted. In summary, I'm very pleased and excited to have finished planting my first thought out and planned cover crop beds. I hope that the beds are successful and that I'm able to learn and share what I've learned about these crops as they grow. As an aside, I also want to point out something else from today's video about how most of the work that we do in the garden is not done in a vacuum. In addition to planting these beds, I first had to harvest and process the vegetables that were already there before I could get around to the new crop. I didn't include it in this video, but I was also processing the vegetables and filming the process as I went during the same time that I was planting the new beds. I was also at the same time hardening off starts, which meant that I was having to set timers to remind me to put them out and then to return them to the greenhouse before they got burned in the sun. I was applying streptomycin spray to my blooming apple trees to prevent fire blight. I needed to fertilize my new tomato transplants, which I never got around to. And these are just a few of the many things that were going on during this one planting. It can all become like juggling plates and can become stressful. Much of the challenge of gardening is in balancing and making wise use of the time that is available for each task and knowing when to just let some things slide. Ideally, for example, I would like to have been able to focus exclusively on planting these beds while not having to spread my attention to harvesting and processing something else. By the same token, I would like to have been able to process the Brussels sprout leaves that I ended up discarding to the compost pile. The important thing to remember is that our time and energy are finite and that nothing is ever perfect. It is tempting to get overwhelmed and let the very things that we do to relieve stress in our lives, like gardening, to become stressful in itself. I'm a member of a Facebook group called Back to Eden Gardening, and one member recently posted about how he is learning to avoid the stress that can occur in gardening by slowing down and appreciating the work that he is able to get done. And most importantly, to, as we work, remember that God is the one who makes the plants grow, and to give Him the glory while following our passions. That's all for this time. Thanks for watching.